Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. You ready to get into something important today?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So today we're going to be looking at the conflict in Sudan. It's something that has tragically flown under the radar for a lot of people, and we're going to try to unpack some really powerful sources today.
Yeah.
We've got a couple of pieces here, including one called Oro en cambio di armi, La brutale guerra in Sudan che tutti murano, which translates to gold in exchange for weapons, the brutal war in Sudan that everyone ignores,
Wow.
and another one called Oro, Army et Crise in Sudan, which means gold, weapons, and crisis in Sudan.
Okay.
So I think we're going to try to use these sources to uncover some of the dynamics at play here.
Yeah.
What's driving this conflict? What kind of impact is it having on people? And really kind of get into the surprising role that gold plays in all of this.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me how a conflict of this magnitude, we're talking millions displaced facing famine, hasn't received the attention it deserves.
Yeah, it's really
I mean,
heartbreaking.
it's a humanitarian crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. And these sources indicate over 10 million people have been displaced. 25 million are facing hunger in just the last 16 months.
It's staggering.
Yeah, to think that a million people are at risk of starvation, it's almost unimaginable. Can you give us some background on how this all began?
Yeah, well, I think at its core, it's a power struggle between two generals.
Okay.
They were once allies, now vying for control over the nation's wealth, primarily its gold and oil.
So these are really the backbone of Sudan's economy.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've got power-hungry generals, a nation rich in resources. It can't be that simple, though, right?
You're right. It's far more intricate than that.
So what are some of the dynamics that are at play that have led to this level of conflict?
One key factor is Sudan's significant gold production.
Okay.
What's truly alarming is that an estimated 50% to 80% of this gold is smuggled out of the country.
So wait, hold on. You're saying that most of their gold is just disappearing.
That's right. It bypasses official records and robs the Sudanese people of desperately needed resources.
How is that even possible?
There are established networks that facilitate this illicit trade, often involving armed groups and corrupt officials.
So you're saying it's like a shadow economy operating kind of beneath the surface.
Exactly.
Wow, that's incredible and deeply concerning.
Yeah.
How does this connect back to the conflict between the generals?
Think of gold as the currency of this conflict.
Okay.
Both sides need weapons to maintain their power,
Yeah.
and they're funding their arsenals through this complex network of gold for guns trades.
So they're essentially bartering gold for weapons.
That's right.
Is this happening on a small scale, or are we talking about major players?
We're talking international players.
Wow.
This trade involves arms manufacturers from several countries, including the UAE, Russia, China, Serbia, Turkey, and Yemen.
That's a long list. It sounds more like an international arms bazaar than a simple exchange.
It's a complex web.
Are there any specific examples of who's involved, what they're trading?
One example that stands out is Turkey's Sarsamaz, a major producer of light weapons. Reports indicate they are supplying weapons to Sudan in exchange for gold. Another is Russia's Kalashnikov concern, the manufacturer of the infamous AK-47 assault rifle.
Right.
Now, these are just two examples, but they illustrate the global nature of this illicit trade.
It's unsettling to think that these well-known companies are potentially profiting from this conflict.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the UAE earlier, and I have to admit that one surprised me. Aren't they considered a regional ally?
Their role is complex, and some might even say controversial.
How are they involved?
While publicly condemning the violence, they're also the primary importer of Sudanese gold.
So they're condemning the violence, but also potentially benefiting from it. That seems like a difficult position to be in.
According to our sources, the UAE imported 39 tons of gold from Sudan in 2022 alone.
Wow.
That equates to over $2 billion. And that's just what's officially recorded.
$2 billion. That's a staggering amount. It definitely makes their role in all of this a lot more complicated. But with so much at stake, why isn't this conflict getting more international attention, especially in Europe?
It's a good question.
We're talking about millions suffering a humanitarian crisis unfolding right before our eyes.
There's no simple answer as to why this conflict has remained relatively underreported. The intricate web of actors and interests involved makes it a very complex situation.
So you're saying the complexity makes it hard for people to grasp what's really happening.
It's definitely a contributing factor.
And let's be honest, media coverage plays a significant role too, right? Out of sight, out of mind, as they say. If it's not on the front pages, does it really register with the rest of the world?
Unfortunately, that often seems to be the case.
It's like a vicious cycle.
It is.
A lack of understanding leads to a lack of media coverage, which in turn leads to even less understanding and action. So you've got this incredibly complex conflict fueled by power struggles, greed, a gold for guns trade happening with tragically little global awareness. It's a grim picture. Where do we go from here? What can be done?
Well, the first step is acknowledging the complexity of the situation and highlighting the human cost. But the question of how to effectively intervene to break this cycle of violence and suffering is a challenging one. There are many different perspectives on this.
And that's what we'll be exploring in the next part of our deep dive.
Exactly. We'll delve into potential solutions, the challenges they face, and the roles various actors can play in pushing for a more peaceful future for Sudan.
Stay tuned because we're just getting started. So we've uncovered some pretty disturbing information about the conflict in Sudan.
Yeah.
It's a complex web of power struggles, greed, and this really shattery gold for guns trade.
Mm-hmm.
But knowing all this, what can actually be done? Is there any hope for Sudan?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's easy to feel overwhelmed, I think, by the scale of this crisis. Mm-hmm. But amidst the bleakness, there are definitely threads we can pull on.
Okay.
Sometimes the first step towards unraveling a problem is simply shining a light on it.
You mean like raising awareness?
Yeah.
Making sure that people understand what's truly happening in Sudan?
Exactly. Awareness is crucial because it has the power to ignite change. It can push governments and international organizations to prioritize this conflict, to seek diplomatic solutions, and even to implement stricter sanctions against those fueling the violence.
So you're saying that public pressure can actually make a difference?
Absolutely. Think about the impact that public outcry has had on other conflicts around the world. When people are informed and engaged, it becomes much harder for governments to ignore injustice.
That makes sense, but realistically, how can we raise awareness? Not all of us can, hop on a plane to Sudan and start shouting from the rooftops.
True, but in today's world, we have tools that can amplify our voices in ways that were unimaginable just a few decades ago.
Right.
Social media, for instance, can be incredibly powerful.
Right.
Sharing information from reputable sources, engaging in online discussions, contacting elected officials. These are all ways to contribute.
So even small actions can have a ripple effect.
Exactly. Think of each tweet, each post, each email, each conversation as a drop in a bucket. Enough drops, and you've got a wave that can't be ignored.
I like that analogy, but awareness alone won't solve this crisis, right?
You're absolutely right.
We need concrete actions that address the root causes of the conflict.
Awareness is the spark, but sustained action is the fuel that keeps the fire of change burning.
Okay.
And that's where the international community have a vital role to play.
So what specifically can the international community do? Where do they even begin?
Well, for starters, there's the existing UN arms embargo on Sudan.
Okay.
Enforcing it more effectively is absolutely crucial. We know that weapons are still flowing into the country despite these sanctions, and that's simply unacceptable.
So cracking down on those who violate the embargo, holding them accountable for profiting from this conflict.
Precisely. We need to see concrete actions, not just empty words. And that requires coordinated effort from the international community, a united front against those who are fueling this violence for their own gain.
You mentioned the UAE earlier, and their role seems particularly complex.
Right.
They're buying Sudanese gold on one hand and condemning the violence on the other. It feels like they're walking a tightrope.
Their position is definitely controversial.
Yeah.
Some argue that their continued importation of Sudanese gold indirectly fuels the conflict, even if unintentionally.
So they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place.
They are in a unique position to leverage their economic ties to push for a peaceful resolution.
So perhaps encouraging the UAE to use their influence to incentivize dialogue and compromise between the warring factions.
That's certainly an avenue to explore. Diplomacy, however challenging, must be at the forefront of any solution. Facilitating talks between the warring factions, finding even the smallest patches of common ground is the only path to lasting peace.
It all sounds incredibly delicate. One wrong move could make things worse, right?
Diplomacy is rarely straightforward, especially in a situation as complex as this. But the alternative, allowing the conflict to rage on unchecked, is simply unthinkable.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, millions are suffering. We can't wait for a peace deal to address their needs. What about the humanitarian crisis unfolding right now?
You're right. The immediate needs of the Sudanese people cannot be ignored. Providing humanitarian aid is not just a strategic move, it's a moral imperative. and it needs to happen regardless of the political situation.
So ensuring that aid organizations have unhindered access to those in need and providing them with the resources they need to operate effectively.
Exactly. We're talking about everything from food and water to medical supplies and shelter. We need to make sure aid is reaching the people who need it most without being hampered by bureaucracy or political roadblocks.
And let's not forget about the long-term consequences of this conflict. Even if a peace agreement were reached tomorrow, the scars of this violence will likely take generations to heal.
That's an essential point. Rebuilding Sudan's shattered infrastructure, revitalizing its economy, addressing the trauma inflicted on its people. These are monumental tasks that will require a sustained commitment from the international community.
It's daunting, but we can't afford to look away. We have a responsibility to help Sudan rebuild and recover.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that the fate of Sudan, the lives of its people, are intertwined with our own. We are all part of a global community, and what happens in one corner of the world inevitably affects us all.
That's a powerful reminder. But in the face of such a massive crisis, it's easy to feel overwhelmed, almost helpless. What can we as individuals do to make a difference?
I understand that feeling. But it's important to remember that every action, no matter how small, can contribute to positive change.
So what concrete steps can we take? Give us something we can hold on to, something tangible.
Well, first and foremost, stay informed. Don't let this conflict fade from your radar. Read articles from reputable sources, follow organizations working on the ground, engage in discussions with your friends and family.
Keep the conversation alive. Spread the word.
Exactly. The more people who understand what's happening in Sudan, the greater the pressure for action, the more likely it is that those in power will be held accountable.
So even just staying informed is a form of activism.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power. And in this case, knowledge can be a powerful tool for change. But beyond staying informed, there are other ways to contribute.
Okay, I'm listening. What else can we do?
There are countless organizations doing incredible work on the ground in Sudan. They're providing humanitarian aid, advocating for peace, supporting those affected by the conflict.
You mean donating to those organizations, providing financial support for their efforts?
Yes, financial contributions can make a tangible difference. But it doesn't always have to be about money. You can volunteer your time, spread awareness through social media, or even write to your elected officials urging them to take action.
So there's a role for everyone to play, no matter their skills or resources.
Absolutely. Every act of kindness, every voice raised in support of justice can contribute to a better future for Sudan.
That's encouraging. It's a reminder that even amidst the darkness, there's always hope. And hope combined with action can be a powerful force for change.
Well said.
Yeah.
And on that note, I think it's time to shift our focus to the individuals caught in the crossfire of this conflict. Let's hear their stories, their experiences of resilience, hope, and the fight for survival.
We've spent a lot of time, understanding the dynamics at play in Sudan.
Yep.
The power struggles, the gold, the lack of international attention. But I think now I want to shift gears a little bit and really talk about the people at the heart of this crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. It's vital that we do that. Behind all the statistics and headlines and the political maneuvering are real people whose lives have been completely upended by this conflict.
We're talking about, families torn apart, homes destroyed, livelihoods lost,
Yeah.
people forced to flee everything they know, facing unimaginable hardship, and really an uncertain future. It's hard to even fathom what they're going through.
It is. And while we can never fully grasp their experiences, I think we can at least try to understand their stories, to hear their voices, and to recognize the human cost of this conflict.
Their stories, their voices deserve to be heard. It reminds us that this isn't just, some abstract political issue happening on the other side of the world.
Right.
These are real people, real lives.
Exactly. People with dreams, hopes, and futures that are now hanging in the balance.
So where do we begin to uncover these stories? I know access to information within Sudan is limited, to say the least.
That's true. But thankfully, there are organizations working tirelessly to document these experiences, to give a voice to those who are often silenced by the chaos of war.
Do you have any examples?
Amnesty International, for one, have been doing some incredible work in Sudan. They're interviewing survivors, meticulously documenting human rights abuses, and advocating for accountability.
That's so important. What about humanitarian aid organizations? I mean, those working on the ground, they must have a unique perspective on the human impact of this conflict.
Absolutely. Groups like Doctors Without Borders, the International Rescue Committee, Save the Children. They're not only providing essential services, but also witnessing firsthand the resilience and the strength of the Sudanese people. Their stories offer a glimpse into the human side of this crisis.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the sheer scale of this crisis. to think that anything we do as individuals can't possibly make a difference.
I understand that sentiment. But it's important to remember that even the smallest act of kindness can create a ripple effect.
So what can we do to support the people of Sudan? What are some concrete steps we can take beyond just staying informed and spreading awareness?
Well, as we discussed earlier, supporting the organizations working on the ground is crucial. Donating to reputable charities. Even a small amount can make a real difference in the lives of those who need it most.
And for those of us who might not be in a position to donate financially, are there other ways to help?
Absolutely. Volunteering your time, even remotely, can be incredibly valuable. Many organizations rely heavily on volunteers for all sorts of tasks. Fundraising, social media outreach, translating documents, even providing legal assistance.
So finding ways to use our skills and passions to contribute to the cause.
Exactly. And even something as simple as sharing information about the conflict. Amplifying the voices of those affected can help raise awareness and create momentum for change.
It sounds like every action, no matter how small, can contribute to creating a more positive future for the people of Sudan.
That's the idea. It's easy to feel helpless in the face of such immense suffering. But we have to remember that hope is a powerful force. And when we combine hope with collective action, even small actions, we can create a ripple effect that leads to meaningful change.
Those are powerful words to end on. And I think that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the crisis in Sudan. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the intricate political landscape to the devastating human cost.
It's been a heavy but necessary conversation. And while the path ahead for Sudan is undeniably long and challenging, I believe that by shedding light on this crisis, amplifying the voices of those affected, and taking action, we can contribute to a brighter future for the Sudanese people.
Absolutely. Thank you for guiding us through this complex and often heartbreaking issue. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope that what you've heard today will inspire you to learn more, stay engaged, and take action, however small, to show your support for the people of Sudan.
Remember, even in the darkest of times, hope endures. And together we can make a difference.